Plains of Cannae, southern Italy. By noon, 70,000 Roman soldiers are dead. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had marched his army over the Alps, through snow and mountain passes, with 37 war elephants, has just delivered the most devastating single-day defeat in the history of the Western world. He surrounded the Roman legions on 3 sides simultaneously, compressed them so tightly they couldn't raise their swords to fight, and methodically killed them. 70,000 men in one afternoon. Rome's 2 consuls are dead. The flower of the Roman aristocracy lies scattered across the Italian dust. Hannibal's soldiers are so exhausted from killing that they have to stop and rest before they can finish. His cavalry commander, Hannibal, rides to Hannibal and tells him, "March on Rome now. In 5 days you will be dining in the capital." Hannibal hesitates. He cannot believe that Rome, after this, will keep fighting. He is wrong. In Rome, the Senate gathers. There is no talk of surrender. No ambassador is sent to Hannibal. No terms are sought. Instead, Rome does something that will confound military historians for 2,000 years. They raise new legions. They arm slaves. They keep going. Why? The answer is not found in their weapons or their formations or their generals. It is found in a philosophy, a way of training the mind, that Rome had been building into its soldiers for generations. A philosophy that, 2 centuries later, would be given its name, Stoicism. To understand what made Roman soldiers different, you need to understand what Roman military training actually was. Most people think of Roman soldiers and picture the equipment, the rectangular shield, the short stabbing sword, the articulated armor. These things existed and they mattered, but they were not the secret. The secret was in the training, and the training was, by ancient standards, almost incomprehensible in its intensity and consistency. Every Roman legionnaire trained every day, not in preparation for a specific campaign, every day as a way of life. They marched 20 miles in 5 hours in full armor, carrying equipment that weighed 60 pounds. They did this repeatedly until they could do it without thinking. They dug fortified camps at the end of every march, not because there was always a threat, but because the discipline of doing it made them prepared anywhere. A Roman army that stopped for the night turned a field into a fortress in hours. That was not logistics. That was psychology. The Roman military writer Vitichus, writing in the 4th century AD, described the philosophy behind this approach directly. If you want peace, prepare for war. But what he meant went deeper than military strategy. He meant the purpose of training is not to prepare for a specific enemy. It is to prepare the self for any enemy. The training was about creating a certain kind of person, one who could function under conditions of maximum stress, uncertainty, and fear. This was not a new idea in Rome. It was the expression of something older, woven into Roman culture from its earliest days, the concept of virtus. Virtus is usually translated as virtue, but that translation misses something essential. The root of the word is vir, man. Virtus meant the fullest expression of human excellence, courage, discipline, duty, the capacity to face difficulty without flinching. It was not a moral code in the abstract. It was a lived practice, demonstrated under pressure. A Roman soldier did not hope to be courageous when the moment came. He trained to be. He rehearsed the behaviors of courage so many times in so many conditions that courage stopped being a choice and became a reflex. This is why Rome did not collapse after Cannae. The soldiers who survived and the new legions raised to replace the dead were not fighting for territory or plunder. They were fighting to remain the kind of men their training had made them. To accept permanent defeat would be to stop being Roman. Around 300 BC, a philosopher named Zeno of Citium began teaching in Athens on a public walkway called the Stoa Poikila, the painted porch. His philosophy held that the world was governed by a rational order, that virtue was the only true good, and that the path to a good life lay not in controlling external events, but in controlling one's response to them. His followers were called Stoics. Stoicism spread through the Greek world and then into Rome. And when it arrived, it did not land in a foreign culture. It landed in a culture that had already been living its principles for generations. The Romans didn't adopt Stoicism. They recognized themselves in it. The central idea of Stoicism, the one that made it so powerful for soldiers, is called the dichotomy of control. It is simple, brutally simple. There are things within your control and things outside it. Your thoughts, your choices, your actions. These are yours. The weather, the enemy's strategy, whether the soldier beside you breaks and runs, these are not. The Stoic practice is to focus entirely on the first category and to accept the second without resistance. For a soldier, this is everything. Fear in battle comes from uncertainty. Will I survive? Will my flank hold? What if their cavalry comes from the left? The mind spirals through possibilities it cannot predict and cannot control. And that spiral, not the enemy sword, is what destroys soldiers. It freezes them. It makes them hesitate. It breaks formations before the enemy even arrives. Roman military training was, at its core, a training in the dichotomy of control. The endless drilling of formations, the daily marching, the camp building. It was not about physical conditioning alone. It was about narrowing the soldier's attention to what he could actually do. His shield, his sword, the man on his left and the man on his right, the 6 inches of ground directly in front of him. Everything else was irrelevant. The philosopher Epictetus, not a soldier but a former slave who had been tortured by his master and never once cried out, wrote the clearest articulation of this idea. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Roman officers did not read Epictetus to their men before battle, but they drilled this principle into them through years of repetition until it was no longer philosophy. It was muscle memory. The second Stoic practice embedded in Roman military culture was something the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. The practice is this: before any undertaking, you mentally rehearse everything that could go wrong. You imagine the worst outcomes in vivid detail. Not to frighten yourself, but to remove the shock of them. A soldier who has spent months mentally rehearsing what it feels like to be surrounded, to watch his companions fall, to be wounded and still have to keep moving, is a fundamentally different soldier than one who has not. The surprise is gone, and the paralysis that surprise causes is gone with it. Modern psychologists call this stress inoculation training. The Roman army had been practicing it for centuries before the term existed. The third practice was the one Romans took most seriously. Memento mori, remember that you will die. This sounds grim. It was not meant to be. The Stoics used it as a tool for clarity. A soldier who has truly accepted his own death, not as an abstract possibility, but as a reality he has sat with and made peace with, is free in a way that nothing else can produce. He can commit fully to the action in front of him because he is no longer spending half his attention trying to survive at all costs. The fear of death, once accepted, releases an extraordinary amount of mental energy. Roman soldiers were not suicidal. They wanted to live, but they had been trained to hold life lightly, to value how they fought more than whether they survived. This distinction, dying with virtues versus living without it, was not a recruiting slogan. It was a genuine hierarchy of values that Roman military culture instilled from the first day of training. The clearest example of all these principles embodied in a single man is Marcus Aurelius. In 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius became emperor of Rome. He was already, by that point, a practicing Stoic philosopher who had studied under some of the finest minds in the empire. He was also, almost immediately, required to spend most of his reign at war, defending the Danube frontier against the Germanic tribes pressing against Rome's northern borders. For 17 years, Marcus Aurelius commanded armies in brutal conditions: cold, disease, supply problems, political instability back in Rome, a plague that was killing millions across the empire. The pressure was relentless and came from every direction simultaneously. And every night in his tent at the front, he wrote, not dispatches, not battle plans. He wrote what we now call the Meditations, a private journal never intended for anyone else to read, in which the most powerful man in the world repeatedly reminded himself of the most basic Stoic principles. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. He was writing these things while managing a war, while watching men die, while making decisions that would determine the fate of millions. The philosophy was not something he retreated to when the pressure lifted. It was how he functioned inside the pressure. His armies held the Danube frontier, not without cost, but they held it. And historians have consistently noted that Marcus Aurelius, unlike many Roman emperors, was distinguished by his calmness in crisis, his refusal to panic, his ability to think clearly when everything around him was chaos. That was not personality. That was 2 decades of daily practice. The Roman legions won for 500 years, not because they were always the best equipped, the most numerous, or fighting on favorable terrain. They frequently were none of these things. They won because they had been trained, systematically and deliberately, to function well in conditions where other armies collapsed, to keep moving when others froze, to maintain formation when others scattered, to think clearly when others panicked. The philosophy that made this possible had a name, but the Romans had been living it long before it did. By the 3rd century AD, something had changed. The legions that Marcus Aurelius commanded were professionals, men who spent their entire adult lives as soldiers, trained continuously, steeped in the culture of virtues and discipline that had defined the Roman military for 500 years. The legions of the late empire were different. The political chaos of the 3rd century. Rome went through over 50 emperors in 50 years, many of them assassinated by their own troops, had shattered the institutional culture that the legions depended on. The drilling stopped being daily. The fortified camps stopped being built on short marches. The philosophy that had been the invisible architecture underneath Roman military success began, quietly, to erode. Worse, the legions increasingly relied on barbarian mercenary troops, men who were often skilled fighters, but who had never been trained in the Roman way, who did not share the culture of virtus, who had no reason to hold a line past the point where survival suggested running. The Germanic tribes that Marcus Aurelius had contained on the Danube, through steadiness, discipline, and their refusal to be broken, were the same tribes that crossed the Rhine and Danube in the 4th and 5th centuries and never went back. Rome did not fall because the barbarians became invincible. Military historians now largely agree that Rome fell because the Romans became less Roman. The disciplined, philosophically prepared, psychologically resilient soldier of the great legions had been replaced by something else. And when the pressure came, as it always does, the structure that had held for 5 centuries finally gave way. In 410 AD, for the first time in 800 years, the city of Rome was sacked. Alaric and his Visigoths walked through gates that Roman legions had defended for half a millennium. The walls were not weaker. The men defending them were. And Alaric's army, which Rome would once have stopped without a great general or a great battle, simply through the grinding discipline of the legions, walked into the eternal city and took what they wanted. The philosophy had left. The empire followed. Here is what Rome actually proved across 500 years of history. The most dangerous enemy you will ever face is not standing in front of you. It is the part of your mind that panics when things go wrong. The part that freezes when the outcome is uncertain. The part that waits for better conditions before committing fully. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. They built an entire philosophy around a single idea. You cannot control what happens to you. You can only control who you are when it happens. And who you are under pressure is entirely determined by how you have trained your mind in the ordinary moments before the pressure arrives. This is what Roman soldiers were actually doing when they marched 20 miles in full armor, dug their camps at the end of every day, and drilled their formations in empty fields with no enemy in sight. They were not preparing for a specific battle. They were building a specific self, one that would not break. The 3 Stoic practices that made them unbeatable are available to anyone. Dichotomy of control. Stop spending energy on what you cannot change. Put all of it into what you can. Premeditatio malorum. Imagine the worst that could happen. Clearly, specifically, in detail. Remove the shock. Prepare the response. Memento mori. Remember that your time is limited. Let that fact clarify what matters and what doesn't. No army required. No empire. No equipment. Only the willingness to train your mind the way Rome trained its soldiers, consistently, seriously, and with the full knowledge that the hard moment will come. The question is simply whether you will be ready, or whether, like so many great powers before and after Rome, you will assume that what has always worked will keep working, right up until the day it doesn't.